Um, as Karim said, my name is Prince Da Costa Abuaji, and I'm from Ghana. So over the few, let's say, 2 years, over the past 2 years, myself and my supervisor, Ayub Sharifi, have been doing some works on city or urban climate change, specifically looking at urban climate policy and planning. And we realized that climate change or climate action plans, specifically the ones that were published or adopted after the release of the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, um, have not really been dealt with regards to the content and structure. So we delve into this to look at how the dynamics have been in regards to urban climate action plans that were adopted or published after the release of the Fifth Assessment Report. So today I'm coming to share with you what we found, and also we can all discuss the findings, and then we look into the future of enhancing climate action planning. So the title is Overview and Compliance Audit of Urban Climate Action Plans Adopted or Published Post-Fifth Assessment Report, what we call the AR5. So the Fifth Assessment Report was actually, the final synthesis report was released in November 2014. So that means basically we are looking at action plans that were published or adopted after 2014, that's 2015 to 2022. So I'll talk about that in the methodology. So let me just delve into a brief about CPEAS. CPEAS stands for Center for Peaceful and Sustainable Futures, which actually is a research center under the IDEC Institute of Hiroshima University. So the main mission or the aim of the CPEAS is to conduct inter and transdisciplinary research, conduct outreach and education activities that will inform policy for a more peaceful and sustainable future. So today I'm representing CPEAS here on IPAM, and then I'm presenting this research. So IDEC is more like uh, an interdisciplinary institute where we have people looking at economics. I'm actually under the International Economic Development Program. We have the Smart Cities, Smart Innovation Program. We have other research centers, and also we have other research centers looking at education in itself. So basically that is it about CPA. I'm sure maybe at a particular time, Ayub Sharifi will come and then give detailed background of CPAs when the time is due. But today I'm here representing CPAs on the IPAM platform. So coming back to the research, this is the outline. I will take us through the background and what motivated us to conduct this research. And then we'll look at the key objectives and research questions. And then we'll look at some concepts that we've used in the research. And then we look at the methodology, and then we go into the findings, and then we do our discussions. So well, it has been visible or evident that now most actions is expected from cities and local government when it comes to climate change. Yeah, it has been said that cities are both the cause and solution when it comes to climate change. Why do we say so? First of all, we all know for the fact that climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions, and majority of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are from cities. About 75% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are from cities. Also, cities contribute a lot to the world's energy consumptions. About 2/3 of the world's energy consumptions also are consumed in cities. So this shows that what really influence climate change are coming from cities. So we unfortunately for us, local governments also have the resources, they have the power as compared to rural government. Urban government and rural government realize that urban governments have that power, they will that resources and authority to implement actions that will address climate change. So we are saying that if cities are able to lead effectively to address climate change, then a lot of people who will be at risk in climate change will be safe. You know, it has been said that about 80% of the world's population will be living in cities by 2050. So if we are able to tackle climate change from the city level, then this 80% of the world population will be safe, or their risk levels will be reduced. So that is why we are focusing majorly on urban areas. And then also with the AR5, which is the fifth assessment report, we realize that our literature has established that the fifth assessment report is actually the first report from IPCC that highlighted or gave global attention to urban climate change with respect to talking about how cities are vulnerable to climate change and how cities will be able to lead the fight against climate change. After the AR5, there have been numerous studies with regards to analyzing climate action plans. Some have looked at climate action plans with respect to its effectiveness. So looking at the outcome, some are looking at even the quantitative outcome, some are looking at the qualitative outcome, some are looking at the relevance, whether what is embedded in the climate action plans are actually something that will be able to meet the needs of the people. So others are looking at the relevance and then the quality of the plans. But we realize that not much has been said with regards to the content and the structure, and to highlight or throw more light on the dynamics of the content and structure of these climate action plans, which were published or adopted after the fifth assessment report. So this motivated us to undertake this research to actually understand the dynamics and also provide lessons that will help in future climate action planning. And then we are looking at, throwing more light on the global perspective of the dynamics of climate action planning. So we set out to, look at two objectives. The first objective was to critically analyze the content and the structure. So here, if I talk about the content and the structure, I'm looking at what we see in the climate action plan, not anything that is said to be an attachment of the climate action plan. We are looking at the climate action plan as a document. What is embedded in the climate action plan? What are the contents in the climate action plan? How is the climate action plan structured? So we'll analyze the content and the structure of these climate action plans. And then looking at the content and the structure of the climate action plan, we try to juxtapose it to emerging climate action best practices to see if they align with these emerging climate action planning best practice. So I will talk about what we call the emerging climate action planning best practices as we go on. So this is how the objectives were solved, or this is how we achieved our objectives. With objective 1, which looks at the content, analysis of the content and the structure, we look at the trends in the adoption or publication of urban CAPs. How has the adoption and publication of urban climate action plans been after the release of the assessment report? And also we look at which area or which areas are these climate actions focusing on? Are they focusing on climate adaptation? Are they focusing on climate mitigation, or they are focusing on both? So we also look at the climate action focus of these urban climate action plans. And then we also looked at the sectors that these climate actions or these climate action plans are looking at to achieve their climate commitment. So we also looked at the sectors, and then all based on the content that is in the climate action plans. And then we cannot look at climate change without looking at mitigation. So we also looked at the level of mitigation pledges and then deep decarbonization pledges in this climate action plan. So when we talk about deep decarbonization pledges, here we mean cities that are aiming at achieving carbon neutrality, or that are aiming at achieving net zero climate action. So we look at that, and then we look at the extent of baseline emission inventory reporting in these climate action plans. So these are the questions that guided the achievement of the objective 1. And then with objective 2, looking at the compliance audit with emerging climate action best practices, we look at 1, the extent to which these climate action plans consider co-benefits, synergies, trade-offs, and conflicts. So these 4 concepts have become emerging best practices in climate action planning, which has largely been suggested by the IPCC and other papers for cities and even nations to consider in developing their climate action plans. And then we also selected the UN Habitat Guiding Principles for City Climate Action Planning as a best practice, and then see how city climate actions align with the principles that are embedded in the UN Habitat Guiding Principles. So I'll talk about, I'll give a brief background on the UN Habitat Guiding Principles for city climate action plan. So let's look at some concepts that we adopted, how we the operational definition of some concepts for the study. So when we talk about city, we actually adopted the UN Habitat definition of cities, where we look at the city proper. For instance, in Japan, every country has the way that they define their cities based on the population. In Japan, a city is an area with 50,000 or more population. And we have the urban agglomeration, and then we also have metropolitan. So any area that fits into the criteria of an urban settlement was termed as a city. And then so our analysis also encompasses city size analysis. So we did the analysis based on the city size. Are small cities doing this? Are medium cities doing this? Are large cities doing this? Are mega cities doing this? So we categorize the cities based on a paper from Lambita that was published in Nature Climate Change. So we said that small cities are cities with a population of less than 300,000, medium cities 300,000 to 1 million, large cities 1 million to 10 million, and mega cities. We use LAMP, and then also, well, this also confirms the definition of mega cities from the UN population division. So population of more than 10 million. So these are the criteria that we use to categorize the cities into city sizes. And then when we talk about an urban climate action plan, we defined an urban climate action plan as any document that focuses on how cities intend to mitigate and or adapt to climate change. So we're looking at climate action plan proper. So if you look at this, we have the City of San Diego climate action plan. Some also call it city energy action plan. We have the CEP, Sustainable Energy Action Plan. We have we even considered other resilience plans that clearly indicate how the city intends to adapt to climate change. We have other energy climate action plans, other comprehensive climate action plan, and all that. So that is the definition of climate action plan as used in this study. And then we're looking at the emerging best practices. As I said, co-benefits and synergies basically helps in achieving multiple benefits from implementing climate actions, whilst conflicts and trade-offs looks at unintended negative outcomes in implementing climate action. So we define co-benefits as any additional positive adaptation benefits that can be achieved from undertaking a mitigation action or vice versa. So if you take a mitigation action, which gives you an adaptation, or you take an adaptation action which gives you a positive mitigation action, we say that there is a co-benefit. And then synergies are when the simultaneous implementation of climate action will result in greater benefits, either than implementing just one measure. So here we look at, for instance, if a city intends to promote energy efficiency of buildings and at the same time trying to promote operational improvements of buildings, then we say that there will be a synergy in the simultaneous implementation of these two actions. So that is that. So these two actually leads to multiple benefits in climate action implementation. And then conflict is when there are incompatibilities with implementing two actions in the long term. So like we all know that infill development is actually a good climate action, especially when you want to promote affordable housing needs. But the long-term implementation of this action is actually will reduce efforts to promote or develop green and natural areas, because most areas that are used for infill development are mostly abandoned areas that are turned into green and natural areas. But if we continue to, develop these areas, building affordable housing needs and all that, it will reduce our efforts to develop green and natural areas. So there will be conflicts there. And then we looked at trade-off. We define trade-off as when the implementation of a climate mitigation action has negative effects on achieving adaptation objective. So most of the times, people interchange trade-offs with more adaptation and all that. Yeah, so these are the definitions that we use. So how did we actually highlight the consideration of co-benefit synergies, conflicts, and trade-off? Obviously, no city will choose actions that will lead to conflicts and trade-off, but most cities will tend to choose actions that will lead to co-benefit and synergy. So in the analysis, we said that um, conflicts and trade-offs are considered in this our analysis when cities discuss the potential of an action leading to conflict, and even go ahead to propose solutions to minimize these conflicts and trade-offs. And then with the co-benefits and synergies, we analyze it from the point of view that cities are actually considering actions that will lead to co-benefit and synergy. There are instances where cities use co-benefits as a criteria to select their actions. We did not concentrate on this kind of criteria selection that, okay, this action will lead to co-benefit, so we take this action will lead to co-benefit. No. So we looked at when the actions are selected and cities are able to tell us that we are implementing in vegetation cover, and this vegetation cover will give us this. So they are actually telling us the core benefits that they will realize from implementing this kind of action. Same as synergies. So we look at these things. So these are the emerging best practices that we try to analyze the climate action to see whether the content and structure of these climate action plans actually aligns or consider these. And then with the city climate action planning, this document was actually published in 2015. And since 2015, it has been used to guide a lot of cities in developing their action plans, especially cities in the Asian regions and also cities in Africa. And it has 8 principles. So we were looking at whether the climate action plan that we have sampled aligns with these 8 principles, and what are some of the factors that influence the non-alignment with these principles. We are doing this because if we know that these are the gaps, these are the factors influencing this non-alignment, then in future climate action planning or in future development of frameworks for climate action planning, we can consider some of these principles. So we looked at that too. So basically, we sampled 278 cities worldwide, and then we use the qualitative content analysis to extract data from these climate action plans, and then we did the content analysis. So we had a criteria for selecting these climate action plans. First, the climate action plan should meet the city or urban criterion. So if it's a climate action plan and it's from a city, then it is considered as part, or it can be considered as part of the study. We also looked at finalized plans that are adopted or were adopted or published after 2014. That is after the release of the AR5. So we looked at 2015 to 2022. That was when the data that was the timelines for the publications that we did. So finalized plans, when I talk about finalized plans, we actually meant that, some of the plans were in their summarized forms, and you cannot, based on the summary version of these plans, to make analysis of the content and the structure. So we looked at the full finalized plan that has been either adopted by the city or has been published in the city's website. Yeah, so we're not looking at, for instance, draft plans, summarized plans that actually, or that only talks about, for instance, just the actions, and it does not talk about other aspects of the climate action plan. Yeah. So some of the action plans actually specify that this plan is not the finalized plan. This is just a summary or a draft of the plan. So those plans were not considered in this study. And then we also look at plans that has been published in only English language because of limited resources to translate non-English language plans to English. So we did not look at those non-English language plans. And then we considered resilient, comprehensive, and master plans. So you realize that some of the cities have comprehensive plans or master plans, but within those master plans, they clearly indicate their measures and everything for climate mitigation or climate adaptation or both. So we also considered these plans as part of the study. So we sampled 278 climate action plans from 278 cities. And then, as I said earlier, we used the qualitative content analysis. So we actually coded the content, and then we looked out for the themes and the patterns, and then we did the analysis. So we adopted two different strategy to download the climate action plan. First, we fell on the databases of International Climate Network. So when you go to C40 cities, for instance, most of the cities that are partners, are members of the C40 cities, have their climate action plans published in the website of C40 cities. So we downloaded some from them. There is the European Union, what do you call it, Commission on Mayors, and then we also looked at climate action plan published in this website, the Zero Energy Project. We looked at climate action plan published in the Zero Energy Project website. And then after that, we did a manual Google search with the cities and local governments. So this was also guided by the UN data on city. So if we take like a city and then we add their climate. So for instance, if I want to know the Tokyo Climate Action Plan, I just take Tokyo, I just Google Tokyo Climate Action Plan, and then it pops up, and then I follow up and make sure that's actually the Tokyo Climate Action Plan. And I make sure that it meets the criteria that we've set, and then I download it and whatever city climate action plans. And so you realize that even with this manual Google search, most of them led us to official website of cities and local government, especially cities from the North Americans and from the Europes. You see a lot, or you get a lot of their climate action plans from their official website. So we downloaded some of the climate action plans from these websites. So then we can move on to the actual results, talking about the methodology and all the concepts and all that. We can look at the results. So we start with the content and the structure. We look at the trends in the adoption. So here we were trying to look at how publication or adoption of climate action plan has been faring after the AR5. So we realized that there has been dynamics with regards to the publication or adoption of climate action plans, and regionally we realized that most of the cities started publishing or adopting climate action plans, except cities in Africa and Latin America, who actually started from somewhere 2020 onwards. Yeah. Africa, there are cities, I think 2 cities that published some climate action plans in 2015, but they did not publish, and then they actually started from 2020 onwards. And then in 2020, cumulatively, the total climate action plan that we sampled realized that majority of them were published or adopted in 2020, despite having the global COVID-19 lockdowns. And we realized that most of these cities or local governments adopted various platforms to meet, to discuss, to adopt their climate action plan. Majority being, social media, surveys, social media meetings, conferences, teleconferences, and all that to adopt and also to draft and publish their climate action plan. So 2020 was the year that we saw the highest number of adoption and publication of climate action plans. And then still on the adoption and the publication, with regards to city size, realize that majority of the cities from small cities has adopted or published climate action plans. This is obvious because in the world, most cities are small cities. And then looking at the sampled climate action plans, we realize that majority of them were coming from small cities. Mega cities only retain 3% of the climate action plans that we sampled. This is also quite obvious because we don't have a lot of mega cities around, but with the ones that we sampled, only 3% were coming from mega cities, and then 23% from medium cities and 18% from large cities. And then looking at the climate action focus, interestingly, after 2014, after the release of the AR5, we realized that majority of the climate action plans are now focusing on both mitigation and adaptation, like simultaneously implementing mitigation adaptation actions instead of initially focusing more on mitigation. Now most of these cities are implementing both mitigation and adaptation climate action plans. So we realize that mitigation, but when cities try to or tends to focus on one of the climate action, they tend to focus more on mitigation instead of adaptation. So this also shows that IPAM as an adaptation platform has a lot to do with regards to promoting adaptation measures in cities, because cities mostly when they are not focusing on both, they tend to mostly focus on mitigation instead of adaptation. So that is it. And we also looked at the sectoral focus of these cities. Here we were looking at which of the sectors are cities really focusing on if they want to achieve their climate action commitment or derive benefit from their climate actions. So there were 17 sectors that has been largely focused on by cities. So you look at the transport sector, the energy sector, the waste, the buildings, economy, agri, behavioral issue, disaster management, and all that. So if you look at the diagram very well, you realize that there are two clusters in the diagram. We have the red cluster and then we have the green cluster. If you look at the actions, what do you call it, the sectors in the red cluster, it tends more to mitigation. So you look at transport, you look at energy, you look at waste, you look at buildings, you look at industry. These tends more to mitigation. And what you realize that the reason for economy to be part of the red cluster, which is actually the mitigation cluster, is that when cities tends to look at economy, they look at green economy, they look at what do you call it, economies that will help them to set up green jobs and promote green economy. So this looks at more of mitigation related actions. And then you look at urban governance, policy and planning, you look at more policies and planning going into mitigation instead of adaptation. So these two tends to be in favor of mitigation related actions. And if you look at the green also looks at adaptation. So if you look at green, blue infrastructure and nature-based solutions, look at water resources and management, you look at disaster management, health, you look at terrestrial and marine ecosystem conservation. This looks at adaptation-related actions. And we also found that equity finding itself in adaptation-related actions is basically is that when cities tend to promote climate equity and climate justice, they look at vulnerability of their people, how they can reduce the vulnerability in terms of disaster and risk issues. So this tends more into adaptation. And then also we look at tourism, and then we look at urban planning. Most of these urban design and land use planning also tends to favor adaptation. So looking at flood risk management, land use planning techniques, and then urban design policies also tends to look at adaptation. And also behavioral issues. Most of the behavioral issues, such as, actions that will influence the behaviors of people, looking at climate awareness, climate education, and all that, also tends more into climate adaptation instead of climate mitigation. So most of these people are not, or most of these cities are not really looking at, really looking at helping people or creating awareness for people to reduce their emission levels, but they are actually looking at how people can really prevent flooding, or maybe build the adaptive capacity of people through climate education and climate awareness. So that's why you find behavioral issues more related to adaptation cluster. Yeah. And then even though there has been, there has been the advocacy to look at equity and climate justice in climate action planning, we realize that climate equity in itself has not really been considered in climate action plan. So you look at the node. If you look at the figure, you study the figure, you realize that the node of climate equity is very small. Yeah, look, so you realize that it's, and if you look at the transport sector, majority of the climate action plans that we analyzed looked at transport sector as a sector for them to achieve their climate goals. So most of them are trying to mitigate climate change, or trying to reduce their emissions through the transport sector. So this is also one interesting thing that we found with regards to it. And then in the analysis, Voice Viewer also helps in doing the total length strength. And let me first look at the occurrence. So the reason for me to say that transport is the most focused sector is that the transport sector was the sector that occurred, a lot in the analysis that we did. So here Voice Viewer has a platform or an approach that you can use text data to analyze. So here we are not doing bibliometric analysis. We just did text data. And I think this is one of the few studies that have used text data that has used Voice Viewer to analyze text data. So we use Voice Viewer to analyze the text data and realize that transport appeared in about 268 out of the 278 climate action plans that we sampled. Yeah, so the transport sector led in the focus. And then looking at the total link strength, here the total link strength from Voice Viewer explains the fact that there's a possibility that if a city chooses transport, the city is likely to choose energy, waste, green, blue infrastructure, and nature-based solutions, and urban governance. So it shows the interconnectedness between these sectors. So the top 5 sectors that have that highest interconnectedness were transport, energy, waste, green, blue infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and then urban governance, policy, and planning. So it shows that cities are likely to choose transport, energy, nature-based solutions, and green and blue infrastructure, and then urban governance, policy, and planning. They go together. If I can say that these 5 sectors go together in the plans that we analyze. And then looking at the GHG emission reduction pledges, we realized that, yes, majority of the cities reported their GHG emission reduction targets. Looking at, oh, we want to reduce emissions by 50% by 2050, by 2030. Yes. 96% of the urban climate action plans that we analyzed actually reported. And then only 1% of them did not report their GHG emission reduction pledges. And then 3% were not added to the analysis because they were adaptation related, what do you call it, climate action plans. So obviously we cannot use those climate action plans for analysis because they were looking at only adaptation. And we also realized that, most of the cities were looking at carbon emission equivalence. So when they talk about we want to reduce our emissions by, let's say, 50 or 20% by 2050, the emissions that they are talking about, most of them did not explicitly state the particular emissions that they were talking about. Only 2% said that, oh, we are talking about carbon dioxide emissions. Others just generalize it, and we took it as most of them were talking about emissions in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. So whether they are looking at methane or they are looking at nitrous oxide, they did not actually specify. Only 2% said that we are reducing carbon dioxide emissions in that. And then looking at deep decarbonization, as I indicated earlier, here we define deep decarbonization emissions as cities that are targeting net zero emissions or carbon neutrality by a specific period. And then we realize that because now it has also become an emerging practice that cities, for us to achieve the Paris goals, cities should try and push more into achieving deep decarbonization, either carbon neutrality or net zero emissions. So we realize that 45% of the urban climate action plans that we analyze actually have deep decarbonization pledges. That means that majority of them still do not have deep decarbonization pledges. And we understand that, setting up a climate or emission mitigation target is context specific. It's based on a lot of resources, but we were just analyzing the content of the climate action plan that we sampled. So we realized that over only 45% of them have deep decarbonization pledges. And then we also look at how the city sizes reported it and realized that even though the sampled megacities were very small in number, realized the majority of the sampled megacities were actually or have actually reported deep decarbonization pledges. And then the rest, majority did not report deep decarbonization pledges. And then it's likely that majority of them will achieve it after 2030. So we are looking at 2031 to 2050 because about 77% of those that have deep decarbonization pledges actually say that they are targeting to achieve their target after 2030. So that is the analysis. So if we are looking at most of these cities achieving their target from now to 2030, then sorry to say, the literature says differently, that majority of them are actually targeting after 2030. So maybe 2031 to 2050. And then mindful of the fact that baseline emission inventory is also very important. It serves as the evidence, it serves as providing evidence-based analysis or assessment for cities to set their mitigation or emission reduction targets. We also sought to see how cities are reporting their baseline emission inventory. So we realized that, so here too, let me state that we focus on only mitigation related climate action plans. We do not focus on adaptation related climate action plan because obviously they are not looking at reducing their emissions. So 91% of the mitigation related plans that we analyzed actually reported their baseline emission inventories, and all megacities that we sampled reported their mitigation related baseline emission inventory. Yeah, and there are dynamics when it comes to the city sizes too. You realize that about majority of the small cities uh, actually reported same as the medium cities and also the large cities. So I think the reporting baseline emission inventory is actually appreciative in the climate action plans that we sampled. And then we did a cross analysis to see that cities that actually report deep decarbonization targets are likely to report their baseline emission inventories because, as I said, baseline emission inventory serves as the basis for setting up your mitigation or emission reduction target. So realize that most cities with deep decarbonization targets actually reported their baseline emission inventories. About 91% of them with deep decarbonization targets reported their baseline emission inventories. Similarly, mega cities and large cities with deep decarbonization targets reported their BEI. So this is also an interesting thing that can influence future climate action planning. So that is it. And then we looked at the tools and methodologies that cities are using to report their baseline emission inventories. Majority of this urban climate action plan that we analyzed use the GPC, that's the Global Protocol for Community Scale GHG Emission Inventories, to report their climate action. They adopted this approach or this tool to analyze their baseline emission inventory, and then they stated that this is the tool that they use. The others also adopted a city-based baseline emission inventory too. So most of the times you realize that the cities have their own statistical office and climate modeling and energy modeling department. They come around and then they adopt either the IPCC methodology, IPCC emission inventory guidelines, and then they add their own ones to have a context-specific BEI too. So we have like 9 of the sampled urban climate action plans adopting a city design tool for their baseline emission inventory. Yeah, and then so apart from Africa and also Latin America, I realized that cities in Asia, Europe, North America, and Oceania had at least one city adopting their own internally developed BEI tool. But the rest either adopted the GPC or the US Community Protocol or the Local Government Operation Protocol or the IPCC guidelines. So in all, we found 29 different tools and methodologies that have been used since the release of the AR5 that have been used to report BEI, that's the baseline emission inventories. So then we can move on to the emerging the compliance audit with the emerging best practices. So here we are looking at whether they consider co-benefits, synergies, whether they consider what do you call it, conflicts and trade-offs. So here also we realize that over 50% of small, medium, and large and mega cities did not consider co-benefits in their urban climate action plans. That means majority, even though co-benefits has been one of the famous concepts and emerging practices within the climate action planning field, still after 2015 to 2022, the plans that were adopted or published within this era, over 50% of them from small, medium, large, and mega cities did not explicitly consider these co-benefits. We also realized that as for synergies and trade-offs and conflicts, we realize that most of these cities are not considering them. Almost all the climate action plans from small and medium cities did not consider synergies, trade-offs, and conflicts. And then none of the mega cities sampled considered these synergies, trade-off, and conflicts. So I think one thing from the content analysis that we realize is that most of these local governments and cities did not actually understand these concepts and how to put these concepts into perspectives in their climate action planning. So that is why you realize that as compared to co-benefits, you realize that most of the cities are actually considering co-benefit as compared to others. This is because most of them do not really understand how to consider synergies, trade-offs, or conflicts in their climate action planning. So this is also an issue that can inform future climate action planning. So here we did the analysis in the total form, looking at co-benefit, synergies, trade-offs, and conflicts. Realize that most of them considered co-benefits as compared to synergies, trade-offs, and conflicts. And then with the UN Habitat Guiding Principles for City Climate Action Planning, we also realized that more than half of the urban CAFs adopted are consistent with at least one of the 8 principles, And then about 48% of them were inconsistent. So that means like 52 were consistent at least with one of the guiding principles, the 8 guiding principles. And about 48%, almost half of them had at least one of their content and their structure not consistent with at least one of the guiding principles. So we went on to look at the top guiding principles that cities do not actually look at, and then we realized that most of the cities' climate action plans were not integrated enough. So here, when they talk about integrated, according to the UN Habitat Guiding Principles for City Climate Action Planning, integrated, they look at how the climate action plans are able to integrate mitigation and adaptation, and also are able to mainstream climate action planning across other sectors. So we realized that about 12% of these climate action plans were not integrated. 15% were not evidence-based. So we realized that 15% of the action plans did not have either resilient or vulnerability assessment that will inform adaptation actions, or did not have baseline emission inventory that will inform GHG mitigation targets. So 15% of them were not evidence-based, and 88% from these 15% were from climate action plans that were focusing on both mitigation and adaptation. And then 12 were from only mitigation-focused climate action plan. And then we also realized that 20% were not inclusive. So here in inclusiveness, we look at the roadmap, the framework of developing the climate action plan. How inclusive was this? How did they include stakeholders? How did they include the community? How did they include vulnerable people in the climate action planning process? So we realized that 20% of the climate action plan that we analyzed were not inclusive. And then we realized that 18% of them were not transparent, and it's not fit for independent verification. So here too, when we talk about transparency and verification, the UN Habitat Principles insist that cities' climate action plans should have metrics, frameworks that will help people to independently verify what they are doing. So like they should have monitoring and evaluation frameworks. They should have even portals where people can send their feedback. They should actually make their climate action plan accessible to everyone. Yeah, so we realized that 18% of these climate action plans were not transparent, and then it's not good for independently verifying what they are doing. And also the comprehensive of the climate action plan was also looked at, and then we realized that 13% of them were not that comprehensive. They did not include other sectors. They don't mainstream climate action plan in other plans of other sectors. So they were just limited to climate change, and then not looking at how they can bring on board other sectors in the climate action planning or in its implementation. So here we realize that majority or the main issues with climate action planning, as juxtaposed against the UN Habitat Guiding Principles, is that the climate action plans that were adopted or published after the AR5 were not inclusive. Majority of them were not inclusive, and then there's lack of transparency for independent verification of whatever, because most of them were not even having indicators to assess the implementation of the climate actions or the projects. You understand? So monitoring indicators were absent, evaluation indicators were absent, budgeting were absent, financing frameworks, source of financing and all that were absent. So it does not make it transparent enough. And then it does not help for other people to independently verify what they are doing. So that is what we found. So the common factors that were influencing these common areas of non-alignment, as I've talked about some earlier, but the inclusiveness, we looked at failure to indicate extensive stakeholder engagement at the planning stage, and then highlighting stakeholder roles in developing the plan. So it is not enough to say that, oh, okay, so in developing the climate action plans, these people were involved, this group were involved, these people. But we were expecting that they go ahead to actually state what they did. So if you engage, for instance, independent consultants in developing the climate action plan, can you tell us what did they do? If youth were part, if students were part, if climate advocates were part, if the private sector were part, what did they do? So we wanted to know how they highlighted the roles in developing the plans. Then the transparency and the verification, as I said earlier, most of them were even not having SMART goals. So you realize that if you just state a goal that, oh, we want to plant trees by 2050, and you don't make it smart enough, it's difficult for people to even be able to assess it. So we were looking at smart goals, like, for instance, we intend to plant maybe 15,000 trees, maybe by 2030. These kind of goals will help if we or if other people wants to independently verify what the city is doing. Based on these goals, they can verify what they are doing. And then, as I said, no monitoring and evaluation framework with measurable indicators and reporting plans were found in these plans. With evidence-based, as I said earlier, no scientific knowledge. They did not explicitly show the scientific knowledge or evidence that inform their inventories and also their resilience and vulnerability assessment. Research or surveys that informs the planning and the target settings were absent in the plans that we analyzed. And then also the comprehensiveness and the integration, we talked about it lacked mainstreaming of the climate action across other local, national, and regional initiatives. So these were the common factors that actually influence the non-alignment. So in case of future climate action planning, this research, the lessons from this research is actually evident for local government to ride on it to develop their climate action plans. So what lessons can we learn from all these findings? So I've realized that climate action planning after the AR5 has really evolved, and there have been dynamics in it. Majority of the cities are actually now looking at integrated mitigation adaptation benefits, moving away from the earlier mitigation only climate planning. Initially, before 2015, literature has established that most of the climate action plans were mitigation only climate action plans. But now cities are looking at both mitigation and then adaptation. Yeah, and then we also realize that future pandemics cannot actually hinder climate action planning processes, because we realize that even though in 2020 there was a global lockdown, cities were actually, dealing with climate action planning. They were still involved in climate action planning using teleconferences and most digital platforms to do whatever they want to do in terms of climate action planning. And then the focus on climate equity is still limited in climate action planning. So this is something that we should look at. And then cities are now looking at the transport sector to achieve their climate benefit, especially with regards to climate or GHG emission mitigation. And then cities are still not considering the rate at which cities are considering co-benefits and synergies to achieve multiple benefits is very limited. So this is something that cities should also look at. But interestingly, they choose to consider more of co-benefits as compared to the other ones. And if cities, for instance, do not actually consider trade-offs and conflicts in their climate action planning, then we are in for long-term unintended negative impact of whatever actions that we would take. So in the planning process, we should try as much as possible to discuss and find solutions to some of the actions that we are proposing to see that whether these actions will lead to long-term trade-offs or conflicts between some of the objectives that we want to achieve. And then there's lack of inclusiveness, transparency and verification, and also evidence-based climate action planning. These are lessons that in future climate action planning we can look at. And then it can also guide the development of frameworks, because all these are basically interesting lessons that in future development of frameworks, we can integrate them into it to have a more comprehensive framework to guide climate action planning. So this paper is actually published in Urban Climate, and is titled Post-Fifth Assessment Report, Urban Climate Action Planning, Lessons from 278 Urban Climate Action Plan, released from 2015 to 2022. Yes, so thank you very much. I will end here, and then we can have our discussion, and then if there is any questions, we can, yeah. So let me say that I'm a PhD student, and I will be finishing or completing soon. I'll be having my candidacy exams in November. So from next year, I'll be available for postdoc opportunities. If any of the members have this kind of opportunity, they can reach out to me, and then I can send proposals and my transcripts and CVs and all other materials required. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time, and thank you for this opportunity to share the results of our paper.